Hi guys! So a lot of you guys asked me how I color my illustrations without the outlines, just like this. And it's actually pretty simple. So today I thought I'm gonna do a tutorial about it and show you how I do it. And I already prepared the sketch. It took me a while again to get the body right. But this is it, and I'm gonna color it right now. For coloring I use the hard airbrush because I fill in the whole shape with one color at first. So I just create a layer below the sketch just like I always do, but this time I lower the opacity of the sketch to about 20 or 10% so I barely see it. And I zoom in quite a lot so I get the edges real clean. And you want to make sure to really color everything very neatly and clean. So at the end you don't need outlines because the color itself is a good border, I would say. And I always twist and turn my illustrations when I do this step, because I'm like drawing with my left hand and it's easier for me to sometimes just flip it over. I'm sorry if that is really confusing for you. Okay, so this is how everything looks like without the lines. And I just realized I forgot to do the earrings, so I'm just gonna go in and do that. And this is the shape without the lines. So you want to make sure all the edges are clean. If not, just go back in and make it a little more, make it a little bit more neat. And now just realize that her legs look a little bit weird. Like not the leg on the front, but the other one has to be a little bit more thick because otherwise it looks weird. So I just adjusted that. And then I select the base color and create another layer on top of that. And just go in with the hard airbrush and color every part of the illustration. So I make a separate layer for the cap and a separate layer for her hair, also her sweater and the jeans. And I also already go in and color her eyes and her lashes and her brows and her lips. And yeah, I'm gonna speed up this process because it takes quite a while. And for her lashes and her eyebrows, I use the Tara's Vine Char sketch because it has a really nice fading at the end and it's perfect for hair. So I really recommend getting that one. Also the Tara's oval sketch, it's also really good. And for the white in her eyes, I used the dry ink brush because I quite like the texture of it. It's very fuzzy and I like having not everything too clean, like having a little bit of a texture in it. But I don't do that for base colors because it's just hard to go in with color afterwards if it's already so textured. Because textured brushes leave some gaps, and when I select it and color on top of it, the gap will just stay. So I do that for coloring in on top of the base color. So I do the same thing with the lips. I also used the dry ink brush for the upper lip, but I always use the soft airbrush for the lower lip. Also, the upper lip is always darker than the lower lip, but I showed you that already in the tutorial. So this is how everything looks like without the lines. And at this stage you can also see if you did a good job or not, if everything is clean or not. So if you are happy, we can go on to the next stage. I just realized that I forgot to color in the buttons of her jeans, so I'm just gonna go in and add some color to those. Okay, so now we are going to create some lines to create some texture without adding outlines. So I go in on the skin first, and I color pick the skin color and select a more reddish and darker color than the skin color already is. You can kind of experiment with the right color for you, but I always use a more red and darker color for it. Actually, before I do the lines, I forgot to do the blush. And the last step I do before I go into the coloring of the lines is I just add some blush to her, and for that I create another layer on top of the skin color pick the skin color, and then choose a more red and dark color, and I go in with the soft brush to create like this gradient, and then I add another layer on top of that and go in with the chalk brush to create this kind of blush stroke that I always do, which always takes me forever, as you know. And then there's also another brush I like to use for blushes, which is the Bonobo chalk. Okay, so now everything is ready for us to give some color to the lines. So I just create a layer on top of everything but below the sketch layer, and color pick the line color that we chose a few moments ago. And I just go in on the skin and draw lines wherever they need to be. So for example, the nose and the lips, and I also do the eyelids and the shadow underneath her face on her neck, and also everything else that needs some separation, so for example the fingers and stuff like that. Oh, and I use the dry ink brush for the lines. And then I basically repeat that step for every part of her illustration. So I go in, here you can see me going in on the cap, and then picking the color and selecting a darker one to create the lines that needs to be done. And I do that for every part of her. So I also do that to her hair and to her sweater and jeans and basically everything to give it some, to make it look good. And I will just fast forward this now because it's just me repeating the same step all over again. So if I'm happy with everything, I select the base color again, scroll to the top of all the layers, add another layer on top of it, set it to multiply for the shadows, and then I select the Taras over sketch brush and use a bright blue to go in for all the shadows. And I had a reference picture for that, and I just kind of imitated the shadows of the reference picture. And when I put all my shadows where I want them to be, I always go in and slightly change the color of each part of the shadow. So I select the shadow layer and change the brush to the soft brush because it makes a better gradient, and then I go in and choose a more violet color, and I just quickly brush over the places that have really deep shadows, like where the sun hits the least. And I also like to change the skin shadow because I like those skin areas to have a more reddish appeal to them. It's just like personal preference, I guess. So just go in with a more reddish color and color over the skin. And once I'm done with that, I select the base color again, scroll on top of all the layers again, and create a new layer with an overlay setting, and choose a warm yellow reddish bright color to just do the highlights now. And I use the dry ink brush to set in all the highlights. And what I always do on the highlight layer is, after I'm done with them, I go in and reduce the opacity to about whatever fits best. I think here I go with about 30% maybe. So yeah, it's always different, it always depends on the drawing, but I never do 100% on the highlights because it just doesn't look natural. And when I'm done with shadow and highlights comes my absolute favorite part, which is adding in the details. So I just select some colors from her hair and go in and just draw those individual strands of hair. It is so therapeutic. I really suggest you trying that because it's just such a cool feeling. And it's best if you unselect your base shape for that, because you also want to add some hair to her outer shape, like that. And then sometimes I like a more textured look on jeans or like bags or caps. So with this cap I wasn't really happy, so I always use the grunge brush, and I create a layer on top of the cap and set it to multiply and just go in with the grunge brush and kind of just brush over it. But then what I noticed was the color of the lines didn't fit anymore because the whole color of the cap has changed to a darker one. So I changed the setting of the layer where the lines of the cap are to alpha lock and brush over it with a darker color until it fits better. And then I just set another layer on top of everything again, and select the base shape before that, and then I just went in and added some more overall shadows to the whole shape, basically, just to give it a little bit more depth. And I do the same thing with a highlight layer. This time I chose the soft light setting instead of the overlay setting because it just gives a more soft light. And then I also add some gradient to her eye color. I use the Bonobo brush again and kind of create a little gradient on her eye. So I choose darker green colors and always brush in lightly from the top. And and then I also create another layer on overlay and just kind of try to do the gradient from the bottom up. So I add some little highlight strokes here and there. And then of course I also do the white highlights that you have in your eyes, and I do that on top of everything and just draw in some white dots with a dry ink brush. And now I just do some little last adjustments that I noticed. So I really didn't like that her face looked so flat, so I added another shadow layer and just added a layer to kind of suggest some texture and some form to her face. But I also lowered the opacity on this one so it's not so obvious. And then I also wanted her helix earrings to look a little bit more real, so I just kind of painted in some more variations of color. So the next thing I do is I select all layers that are in the illustration and I group them, and then I duplicate the group and flatten the group. If you saw my third basic tutorial that I made, I always adjust the levels and curves at the end, and this is just what I'm doing here right now. So if you want to know what I do here exactly, I suggest you to watch the third part and last part of my tutorial series that I just did. And I promise it's a short video. And that's it. This is how I color without outlines. And yeah, let me know if you prefer this or if you prefer it with lines, because I like both actually. Sometimes I like it more sketchy and sometimes I like it more clean and neat. But yeah, let me know, and I hope it was helpful. And I see you in my next video. Bye!